Venezuela, once a beacon of wealth and prosperity in Latin America, has transformed into a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. This is the story of a nation that was once the richest in the region, buoyed by its vast oil reserves, and how it has descended into a humanitarian crisis that has left millions struggling for survival. The collapse of Venezuela is not just an economic tale. It is a complex narrative woven with threads of political mismanagement, corruption, and the consequences of ideological extremism. In the mid-20th century, Venezuela was a land of opportunity. The discovery of oil in the early 20th century catapulted the nation into a position of wealth that few could rival. The country became a member of OPEC, and its oil exports fueled not just its economy, but also the dreams of its people. With oil prices soaring, the government invested heavily in social programs, infrastructure, and education. The middle class flourished, and the nation enjoyed a standard of living that many in the region envied. However, this prosperity was built on a precarious foundation, one that would soon crumble under the weight of mismanagement and ideological fervor. As the years went by, the Venezuelan government began to adopt increasingly socialist policies. The rise of Hugo Chavez in the late 1990s marked a significant turning point. Chavez promised to redistribute wealth and empower the poor, but his policies often prioritized ideology over sound economic principles. Nationalization of industries, including oil, was heralded as a means to ensure that the wealth of the nation benefited all Venezuelans. However, this approach led to inefficiencies, a lack of investment, and a decline in production. The very lifeblood of the economy, oil, began to stagnate. Chavez's successors continued down this path, doubling down on socialist policies that stifled entrepreneurship and innovation. The government imposed price controls, which initially seemed to benefit consumers, but ultimately led to shortages of basic goods. As businesses struggled to operate under these constraints, the economy began to contract. Inflation, which was once a distant concern, spiraled out of control. By the time Nicolás Maduro took office, the country was already on a downward trajectory, and his administration's response was to further entrench the very policies that had led to the crisis. The consequences of these decisions were catastrophic. Venezuela, once a nation of abundance, became a place where people stood in long lines for basic necessities. Food shortages became commonplace, and the average citizen found it increasingly difficult to afford even the most basic items. The healthcare system, once a source of pride, crumbled under the weight of mismanagement and lack of resources. Hospitals became ghostly shells, unable to provide even the most essential services. The people of Venezuela were not just facing an economic crisis, they were experiencing a humanitarian disaster. As the situation deteriorated, the government's response was to deny the reality of the crisis. Maduro's administration often blamed external forces, such as the United States and other foreign powers, for the country's woes, framing the narrative as one of imperialism versus socialism. This rhetoric resonated with some, but for the majority, it was a painful distraction from the daily struggles they faced. The reality was that the government had squandered the nation's wealth and resources, and the people were paying the price. The exodus of Venezuelans began as desperation set in. Millions fled the country in search of a better life, creating one of the largest migration crises in the world. Neighbors like Colombia and Brazil bore the brunt of this influx, grappling with the challenges of integrating millions of refugees. The once vibrant cities of Venezuela became shadows of their former selves, with empty streets and abandoned homes. The social fabric of the nation began to fray, as families were torn apart and communities disintegrated. In the face of this crisis, the international community has struggled to respond effectively. Humanitarian aid has been complicated by political considerations, with some countries supporting the Maduro regime, while others have sought to provide assistance to the opposition. The situation has become a geopolitical chess game, with the lives of ordinary Venezuelans caught in the crossfire. While some nations have stepped up to provide aid, the scale of the crisis has often outstripped the response. The collapse of Venezuela serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the pitfalls of ideological extremism. It is a stark reminder that wealth, when mismanaged, can quickly turn into poverty. The Venezuelan experience underscores the importance of sound economic policies, the rule of law, and the need for a government that is accountable to its people. It highlights the necessity of fostering an environment where entrepreneurship can thrive, where innovation is encouraged, and where the wealth generated by natural resources is used to benefit all citizens, not just a select few. As we reflect on the Venezuelan crisis, we must also consider the lessons it offers to other nations. The allure of populism and the promise of quick fixes can be tempting, but history has shown us that sustainable growth requires a commitment to sound economic principles and respect for individual freedoms. The road to recovery for Venezuela will be long and arduous, but it is not impossible. With the right leadership, a commitment to reform, and the support of the international community, there is hope that this once rich nation can rise from the ashes of its collapse. In conclusion, the story of Venezuela is one of lost potential and broken dreams. It is a narrative that resonates deeply in a world where economic disparities continue to grow. As we watch the unfolding events in Venezuela, we must remain vigilant and learn from its past, ensuring that we do not repeat the same mistakes. The future of Venezuela, and indeed the future of many nations, depends on our ability to prioritize sound governance, economic responsibility, and the well-being of all citizens.